Florals for spring, groundbreaking. It's the seasons episode of Hello from the Van. Ah, yes, the seasons. Spring, summer, fall, and winter. Who determines those? You see, this last week, my kids went through an existential crisis. An existential crisis is when you question something that you previously believed to be true. They asked me what time it was, and I jokingly said, "Does it matter? Time's made up anyway." And now, me stating that time was made up, well, that got my kids questioning everything, and that was just a little too much for a regular old Tuesday. But that's a topic for another podcast, because today we're talking about their very natural follow-up question. Who determines the seasons? Is that made up too? And this led me down a research rabbit hole, and today I'm taking you with me. To start, we need to lay some groundwork and to be very specific in what we're talking about. We are talking about the dates of the first day of spring, the first day of summer, the first day of winter. Who determines those dates? Well, this week's questions may seem based in culture and in history. Their answers actually lie in science, specifically the solar system and the tilt of the Earth. Let me explain. A lot of people think that the Earth is closest to the sun in summer and farthest away in winter. That's not actually true. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Like, oh yeah, close to the sun, warm, hot, ooh, summer. Yeah, nope, wrong, incorrect, not factual. Big old thumbs down to that. It is not correct at all. Here's what NASA has to say. Quote, "In the northern hemisphere, it is the opposite. We have winter when Earth is closest to the sun and summer when it is farthest away. Compared with how far away the sun is, this change in Earth's distance throughout the year does not make much difference to our weather." Close quote. It has nothing to do with how close we are to the sun and has everything to do with the tilt of the Earth. Here's what that means. Earth's axis is an imaginary pole. It goes right through the center of the Earth from the top to the bottom. Earth spins around this imaginary pole, making one complete turn each day. We go from in the sun to away from the sun. That would all be fine and dandy, except for this axis is not straight up and down. Basically, when you look at a picture of the Earth, it always looks straight up and down, right? But in all actuality, the Earth is tilted as it rotates through our solar system, and that tilt is what determines the season, not the proximity to the sun, but the tilt of the Earth. Let me explain. And to do that, I need to introduce two new words to our podcast vocabulary. The words are equinox and solstice. And these events are how the dates of the seasons are determined on our calendars. Equinox and solstice. Remember how I said in an earlier episode that English is a cornucopia of different languages? Yep, equinox is one of those words. The word equinox is derived from two Latin words, equis, meaning equal, and nox, meaning night. So the word equinox literally means equal night. At the equator, the sun is directly overhead at noon on the equinox. Now, here's the deal. Because our world travels cyclically around the sun, there are actually two equinoxes each year, spring and fall equinox, vernal and autumnal. Here's what the U.S. Weather Channel says about that. Quote, "There are only two times of the year when the Earth's axis is tilted neither toward nor away from the sun, resulting in a nearly equal amount of daylight and darkness at all latitudes. These events are referred to as equinoxes or equal nights." Close quote. The other side of that coin is what's called a solstice, and the solstice happens in summer and in winter. So equinox, spring, fall. Solstice, summer, winter. The summer solstice occurs at the moment the Earth's tilt toward the sun is at a maximum. Therefore, on the day of the summer solstice, this is the longest day of the year. And the winter solstice is then the shortest day of the year for sunlight. So equinox, equal night. Equinox happens in the spring and in the fall. Solstice, summer solstice, longest day of the year. Winter solstice, shortest day of the year. So the next question then becomes, how do these positions of the tilt of the earth determine the dates of our seasons? Well, the first day of spring just happens to be the vernal equinox or the spring equinox. The vernal equinox is called astronomical spring. Scientifically, that is the first day of spring. This is normally between March 19th to 21st, depending on the year. It's actually very predictable. The first day of summer, called astronomical summer, is determined by the summer solstice. So if you look at a calendar and it says summer solstice, that's also the first day of summer. Now, we're talking about the northern hemisphere, so everything above the equator. But what if you live somewhere like Australia, that's in the southern hemisphere on the other side of the equator? Well, they're just the opposite. The northern hemisphere has their summer solstice in June, and the summer solstice in the southern hemisphere is in December. A great way to think about this is when you think about Christmas. During Christmas in Australia, it's actually the middle of their summer. However, in the northern hemisphere, our Christmas, December, is in the middle of winter. That's all due to the Earth's tilt. But it does make one wonder, how long have humans been aware of the tilt of the Earth? How long have we observed things like the equinox and the solstice? Well, the answer is quite a doozy. According to every historical guide I could find, as well as the officials at NASA, humans have known and observed the equinox and solstice cycle as far back as 5,000 years ago. And how do we know that scientists know that ancient peoples knew about the equinox? Well, there's a lot of evidence for it, actually. Those ancient peoples left us a lot of evidence about their acknowledgement of the equinox and solstice. We have monuments like Stonehenge in England and Manjaro in Malta that date all the way back to the Neolithic era. That's 3,000 to 4,000 BC, and these structures are aligned with the equinox sunrise. We also have ancient monuments like the Great Sphinx of Giza. It's believed to align with the equinox sun, and the Mayan pyramid at Chichen Itza creates a serpent of light on its steps during the equinox. Not a coincidence. It was by design. We also have ancient records. The Persian New Year, called Nowruz, has been celebrated on the spring equinox for over 3,000 years. Basically, we have a lot of evidence that these people knew about the equinox, and not just knew, they celebrated it. It was a part of their religions, of their cultures, and their lives. So for us modern day folks, the equinox and the solstice is just something that pops up on our Google Calendar and says, hey, by the way, it's the first day of spring. But for these ancient peoples, it was a celebration, a rebirth, and a change of the seasons. Unironically, winter solstice has always been important to me. Let me explain why. There was a time in my life when I lived in Eastern Europe. I was coming up on my second winter there, and it was right before Christmas time. It was cold. It was lonely. I was far from home. I was homesick, and I had a roommate, Mackenzie. We're still friends to this day. Shout out, Mackenzie. And we were both really struggling. And I woke up one morning and I turned to her and I said, it is winter solstice today. This is the darkest it's gonna get. This is the worst it can be. From this day on, at least the sun will be a little bit brighter. And I hope that you guys kind of take that with you too. Remember that no matter what, the days will get longer and the sun will shine bright again. And with that, I'm Mimi Fotz, and this has been yet another episode of Hello from the Van. Good morning, everyone. I'm Mimi Fotz, and this is Hello from the Van. Today's topic comes to us from my second-born, Robert Bobby, who has been begging for this topic to be covered for the last 2 months. You see, my kids and I live in a region that has recently experienced a lot of smaller earthquakes. I was in the middle of cutting my oldest's hair when suddenly we heard a deep noise from within inside the mountain, followed by a lot of shaking. I scrambled and yelled, "Earthquake!" and got the kids to a safe place to wait it out. And I would love to say that this is a one-off, but we've been in several earthquakes over the last few weeks, so it wasn't that big of a deal. But yeah, it brought up a lot of questions at the Fotts household. Questions like, what makes a natural disaster? What qualifies something as a natural disaster? And what's the best way to prepare? So those will be the 3 questions that we will be answering in today's episode. What qualifies a natural disaster? What makes a natural disaster? And what's the best way to prepare? Let's start with the first question. What qualifies something as a natural disaster? The answer to that question is in the name. It's not just a disaster, it's a naturally occurring one. Natural disasters are things that would happen on their own without the aid or assistance of humanity. And for it to qualify as not just a natural event, and instead a natural disaster, it has to happen on a grand or major scale. And that scale must impact humans. If it happens, but it doesn't affect humans, well, then it's not a disaster, according to us, apparently. It's one of those whole, if a tree falls in the forest and nobody hears it, did it actually happen? It's the same with natural disasters. If an earthquake happened, but nobody felt it, well, is it a disaster? So to answer the question, what qualifies something as a natural disaster? Well, it needs to happen on its own without the aid of humans, and it needs to happen on a large enough scale that it impacts humanity. And that brings us to our second question, what makes a natural disaster? And to answer this question, we got to break things down a little bit. There are 3 major types or classifications of natural disasters. The first is geological. This is anything that has to do with the earth. So here's the deal. We know that the English language is just a lot of languages smushed together, right? It's just a cornucopia of languages and times and places. That also means that there are some fun consistencies, and one of those is Greek. We get a lot of our root words from the Greek language. I know that this doesn't seem like it's connected to natural disasters, but it is. So stay with me for a second. The word geo, G-E-O, the root word means earth in Greek. So anytime you hear a word like geology or geologist, a geologist is someone who studies the earth. It's a scientist of the earth. Geology is the study of the earth, right? A geological disaster is a disaster of the earth, such as an earthquake or a volcano. And again, it's scale that matters. The kids and I, the earthquakes that we've been in, have all been under a 4.0. They haven't been very large. They have not qualified as disasters. They've just been your run-of-the-mill everyday earthquake. They didn't ruin anything. They didn't kill anybody. No one got harmed. They were just a shake-up in a morning routine. As we know, there are volcanoes all over the earth that are constantly erupting. Now, they aren't in a constant state of natural disaster because they don't affect humans regularly. It's the scale that matters. In order for it to be a disaster, it must affect humans in a catastrophic way. The second type of natural disaster is a meteorological, weather-related. It's a weather-related disaster. This includes things like hurricanes, tornadoes, blizzards. Remember those Greek root words we talked about? The Greek word meteor means thing high up in Greek. So just like geo means earth and a geological disaster is a disaster of the earth, a meteorological disaster is a disaster high up or in the air. This type of natural disaster is all about extreme weather, tropical cyclones, tornadoes, severe weather storms of any type, heat waves, cold waves, droughts. It all has to do with things coming from above. So hence the name meteorological disasters. And that brings us to our final type of natural disaster, environmental disasters. These are things like floods, wildfires, droughts, things that aren't necessarily all weather or all earth related. Remember how I said the English language is a lot of languages together? Well, the root word for environment is actually French, environner, and it means to encircle or surround. So an environmental disaster is a disaster that encircles or surrounds you. Here's the interesting thing about environmental disasters. Remember earlier how I said that natural disasters happen without the aid of humans? Well, some environmental disasters are because of humans. Let me give you an example of an environmental disaster that wreaked havoc on the environment and cost a lot of lives. In 1989, the Exxon Valdez oil spill off Alaska's Prince William Sound dumped 10.8 million gallons of crude oil into the environment. This spill alone killed over 250,000 seabirds, 2,800 otters, 300 harbor seals, 250 bald eagles, and numerous other wildlife. The Alaskan fishing industry also suffered tremendously as a result of this spill. The Exxon Valdez spill is the second largest in U.S. waters and the costliest disaster to ever occur with no human fatalities. While some environmental disasters are not our fault, a lot of them are. Environmental disasters are severe, often human-caused incidents that destroy ecosystems, endanger human health, and cause long-term, sometimes irreversible damage to air, water, and soil. So to review, the 3 types of disasters are geological, meteorological, and environmental. Say them with me. Geological, meteorological, and environmental. The interesting thing is not all types of natural disasters affect every area. And that brings us to our third question of the day. How do you prepare for a natural disaster? Here's the deal. You need to know what's going on in your area of the world, where you live. Would it be helpful for kids in Phoenix to prepare for an epic ice storm on a coast? Absolutely not. And at the same time, do you think kids in Massachusetts need to prepare for 120-degree weather like kids in, say, Yuma, Arizona? Probably not. The trick is to know what natural disasters your area is prone to and then confidently and calmly prepare. One of the founding fathers of the United States, Benjamin Franklin, put it famously by saying, "By failing to prepare, you are preparing to fail." Basically, do the best you can with what you have to prepare your home and your space for a disaster that could come your way. The trick here is to not stress yourself out. We will not be doing that. Do not let this podcast episode be the beginning of a tumult in your home. No. This is where we peacefully and calmly prepare. One of the simplest ways that you can prepare is to have a family safety plan. This comes directly from my dad, who was a first responder for over 35 years. Now you might be saying, but we have a family safety plan. It's called cell phones. I have an Apple Watch. No. One of the first things to go down in a natural disaster is cell phone communication. So let's play a little scenario game. If you or your parents didn't have access to cell phones, what's your plan? What are you going to do? Let's say that you're at school and your parents are at work and a natural disaster happens. A storm rolls in or an earthquake happens. What's your plan? It can be a little daunting and a little scary if you don't have a plan. That's why we prepare, because then you know exactly what you're going to do if something does happen. It takes a lot of the stress out of what can be a very scary situation. The next thing you can do if you're worried about a natural disaster in your area is to prepare to the best of your ability. What level of preparation you are comfortable with might be different than your friends or family or neighbors, and that's okay. Just remember to prepare to the best of your ability. One way that you can do that is by having what's called a 72-hour survival kit and securing one in your home. In all of my research, one consistent thing that I found across government and non-government agencies and rescue organizations is having 1 gallon of water per person in your family per day, a 3-day supply of non-perishable food, and some sort of first aid kit. Then go from there. Parents, there are great resources at beprepared.gov. And finally, the last thing you're going to do is look up which natural disasters your area is prone to. It will be different for each and every one of you. So take the time to learn about the risks associated with your area and then plan accordingly. In the words of Dwight D. Eisenhower, in preparing for battle, I have always found that plans are useless, but planning is indispensable. And with that, I'm Mimi Fotz, and this has been a disastrous episode of Hello from the Van. Ooh, before you go, did you know that we have study aids on our YouTube channel? We also have a visual podcast if you prefer to watch rather than listen. So join us over there on YouTube at Hello from the Van. We'd love to see ya. Earthquake! I'm Mimi Fotz, and this is the Earthquake edition of Hello from the Van. Last month, we talked about natural disasters, and from that episode, I was asked quite a few follow-up questions by our listeners in an effort to please the tiny masses. Today, we are diving deeper into a very specific type of natural disaster, the earthquake. Before we begin, all information in this episode comes from 3 sources: the U.S. Geological Survey, the UC Berkeley Seismology Lab, and the University of Utah Seismology Lab. And with that, today we will be answering 3 questions. The first, what causes an earthquake? The second, how do we prepare for and survive an earthquake? And finally, what do you do after a major earthquake? Let's get shaking. Our first question today is, what causes an earthquake? Before we can answer that question, we need to talk about the anatomy or makeup of the earth. And what is the earth made of? It is made of 3 parts: the core, that's the innermost part; the mantle, that's the liquidy gooey center; and then the crust, that's the part that we live on, the crust. And the crust is what causes the earthquakes. In its simplest form, an earthquake is the result of friction. Really quickly, we are going to demonstrate this principle together. Take your little cute hands, you're going to put them together, and you are going to rub your palms together. It's going to get warm. Let's do it together. Ready? Go! That is friction. Friction is the release of energy between 2 items. And in the case of an earthquake, it's the result of 2 slabs of earth rubbing together, and it releases energy. Again, friction. Now, we're not done with those cute little hands yet. You see, the crust of the earth is made up of about a dozen rock masses. We call these plates, tectonic plates specifically, and they are constantly moving on the ooey gooey center of the earth. But this movement is slow. Let's demonstrate this with our hands again. Don't hurt yourselves now, all right? You're going to take your hands, put your palms together, and rather than rubbing your hands together very quickly, you're going to press your hands together as hard as you can. You're going to feel some strain in your elbows and your shoulders. Try and move your right hand upwards just a little bit. And now, if you're like me, your right hand just shot forward. That is a result of the release of energy. If our hands were 2 tectonic plates, all that pushing together has to go somewhere. That release of energy would be an earthquake. Over time, tectonic plates in different places will move apart, push together, or slide past one another. This movement causes a lot of pressure to build up, and when the pressure gets too great, the rock masses will suddenly shift along a crack in the crust. A crack in the crust of the earth is called a fault or a fault line. And when those shifting rocks release that energy, it's called a shock wave. The waves spread through the rocks in all directions. This is, again, the epicenter of an earthquake. In most powerful quakes, people even thousands of miles away from the center of the earthquake can feel the ground shake. And in some places, it's not the pushing together of the tectonic plates, it's the crumbling of the tectonic plates that causes the earthquakes. Fault lines are all around the earth. If you are interested to know where the nearest fault line is to where you live, it's a quick Google search on the U.S. Geological Survey. They have a list of all of their known fault lines, and you can look up and see what your risk of an earthquake is in your area based on your address and where you live. So that's how an earthquake is formed. Just a lot of pressure. But how do you prepare for an earthquake? Much like we talked about in our natural disasters episode, have a family emergency plan. Make sure that you have an accessible 72-hour kit. Food, water, a flashlight, some things to get you through a couple days. If you are really worried about earthquakes, there are some extra steps that you can do. These include things like securing all of your furniture to the floor or to the wall. Making sure that if you have pictures or knickknacks or things hung on the wall, that there is a way to secure them. And another tiny little thing that I've experienced myself, if you have a shelf above your bed, make sure that that shelf is fully attached to the wall and that there are not things that will fall off that shelf onto you during an earthquake. Been there, been hit by that. And for you adults out there, if you are in an apartment or a home or a condo, make sure that you know where the gas turn-off valve is in case of a leak. So we've talked about preparation and where earthquakes come from. How do we survive an active earthquake? This is an interesting one for me because I remember as a kid being told to head to a doorway. It was all the rage in 80s educational videos. Head to the nearest doorway. That's the safest place to be. Well, guess what? Yeah, that advice has changed. That is no longer the go-to advice. Advice now is to drop, cover, and hold on. The University of Utah Seismology Group even made a cute little jingle about it. Drop, cover, hold on. Drop, cover, hold on. Hold on. It's pretty self-explanatory. Step 1, drop down wherever you are. Drop down to your hands and knees and hold on to something sturdy. If you're in a wheelchair, you're going to make sure that the brakes are on. If you're on a walker, also make sure the brakes are on. You are going to then try and find something sturdy to hide under, a table, a chair, a desk. If you find yourself in a vehicle during a major earthquake, the advice is to simply safely stop your car and put on the brakes. You're just going to ride it out, if you will. It's not funny. It's fine. Step 2 is cover. Cover your head and your neck with your arms. If there is a sturdy table or desk nearby, crawl underneath it for shelter. If there's no shelter nearby, you're going to do the same thing we talked about before. Go to an interior wall away from windows. And the final step, hold on. If you are under a table or a desk, hold on with one hand and be ready to move with the table if it moves. If you are seated and unable to drop to the floor, bend forward, cover your head with your arms, and hold on tight. So those steps again, drop, cover, and hold. Say it with me. Drop, cover, and hold on. If you are inside of a building when an earthquake starts to happen, stay inside, all right? Don't run outside. I was pretty young when I experienced my first major earthquake. I'm not going to lie. I did none of the things that I have suggested. It was a hot, shaky mess. Don't be like me. This earthquake, I was literally running around like it was the last 10 seconds of a countdown for hide and seek, and I couldn't find a hiding place. It was not the best way to handle the earthquake. And then, of course, the first thing I did when the shaking stopped was run outside. Don't do that. Don't be like me. If you're outside, stay outside. If you're inside, stay inside. And move away from areas that could have things drop on you. Be on the lookout for flying debris. And finally, what to expect after an earthquake. Like I've said before, I've been through a lot of earthquakes, and aftershocks are always a little shocking, if you will. You think, oh, it's over. And then before you know it, you're like, oh, again? It's just one of those things that happens. After the major earthquake, be prepared to drop, cover, and hold on again for any subsequent aftershocks. But what do you do if you're trapped after an earthquake? If you have a cell phone, text. Trying to call might not go through. Texts are more reliable in a disaster. If there is debris in the air, cover your mouth with your shirt for filtration. And instead of shouting for help, grab something or even use your hand. Try banging on a pipe or a wall or anything that you can to make noise to get attention towards you for rescue crews. Remember, text messages are always more reliable after a major emergency. And finally, remember your family safety plan. Having a safety plan in place will hopefully help you with that earthquake anxiety. Our tectonic plates are always on the move. Let's look at the statistics. There are around 200 earthquakes every single day. It is a daily occurrence all across the world. That friction we talked about at the beginning of the episode, it's always happening. It is ever present on the crust of the earth. Simply put, do the best you can to prepare, and then don't worry about the rest. With that, I'm Mimi Fotz, and this has been Hello from the Van.